Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the government can forcibly vaccinate you, says Alan Dershowitz. Dr. Yvette Lozano may or may not join us to talk about her use of hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19 patients, tracking and tracing, the need versus the danger, and Memorial Day. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
And hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. So, Alan Dershowitz, the endlessly surprising constitutional lawyer, former Harvard Law professor, I think he's taken a break from there, but he is a big liberal professor and was a renowned constitutional scholar and is a Hillary Clinton supporter, but he's been among the most amazing people throughout the course of the Trump presidency for his willingness and commitment to simply apply the constitutional standards he knows and teaches without political bias. And so he has many times come to the defense of the Trump administration and pointed out how grotesquely unfair, dishonest, unlawful the conduct has been on the American left, within the DOJ, the FBI, within Congress, the way they use the government and use their powers to attack Donald Trump. So he's kind of oddly become a little bit of an icon on the right, even though he's a liberal and a Hillary supporter, because of his commitment to speaking truth. So something he said caught a lot of people's eye, I think it was yesterday, that I want to just talk about and talk about how alarming it is. So in the course of an interview, it says Alan Dershowitz said, essentially, the government can forcibly vaccinate adults. Not just kids, we'll leave that question off entirely, but can forcibly vaccinate adults. He was being interviewed about the whole threat with coronavirus and COVID-19, and in this interview, attorney and constitutional scholar extraordinaire Alan Dershowitz said, the Constitution gives state governments the power to vaccinate the people in order to protect the people from a contagion. Specifically, his words, let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread the disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business. This is Alan Dershowitz. The show was Crowdsource the Truth. The host of the interview is named Jason Goodman. He asked, if the government rules you have to be vaccinated, you have to be vaccinated. He said, absolutely. And these are Dershowitz's words. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. This is the constitutional scholar who is in many issues has come out more on the side of protection of the people, upholding the rule of law. And this is what he's saying the Constitution means. He actually says there are cases, Supreme Court cases. I have not had the chance to research. I'm going to come back to this another day, but I raise it in this first five for a different reason. But he said, you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution gives the state the power to compel that. And there are cases in the Supreme Court. I want to talk about this today in the first five because we're getting to a point with this coronavirus where we are dealing with government mandated tracing and tracking, government suggested tracing and tracking, which lead to government orders to people that you must be tested and then you must stay home if you're tested if the result is bad. And so he's taking it one step further. I want to be really clear about something. I'm going to dive in about the coronavirus in a second, the specifics of that case. He's not talking about if you're already ill and contagious. It's one set of issues related to police power. If you are already ill, you know you have, let's say it's a coronavirus, you know you're contagious, and you refuse to stay home. That's one set of issues where the question, the state power of the government to say, if you don't stay home, we're going to make you stay home in some government-owned facility for your 2-week incubation period. We're going to make you stay home. Now I'm saying that's one question if you're already infected. He's talking about people who feel perfectly healthy, who have no symptoms, who have no reason to suggest they are contagious, that if the government felt this virus threat was serious enough, the government has the right to forcibly vaccinate you against your will. As he says, literally drag you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. That's the government's right. In order, it's not the government's right because they are trying to protect you, the person receiving the vaccination. He's saying it's the government's right to do that in order to protect the broader community, protect your fellow citizens, that if something's really egregiously contagious, that everybody they can find has to be vaccinated to protect the general public, to have fewer and fewer people who could possibly infect others. I'm going to tell you, he would not have said that if the constitutional law were not there to back him. I'm assuming it is. Now, cases can be relitigated. Courts can look back at cases and say, that was actually a bad decision. We now, the famous ones about segregation, where there originally was a Supreme Court case that said that segregated public schooling was constitutional, and the court later said, no, it wasn't. We were wrong. But he's saying right now that's the status of where we are. But what I want to talk about on this subject today about coronavirus and what he said and where we stand is this. We are at a dangerous point in this country because the original models that we've been talking about to death, the original models that came out of, I think it was Oxford College, whatever the name of Imperial College in London, Dr. Neil Ferguson ridiculously exaggerated, completely false models. But those numbers, and the numbers that also came out of that institute at the University of Washington, similar numbers that gave alarmingly huge projections about deaths in America, those projections they were kind of the starting point in our country, in our culture, for thinking about how serious is this problem and what are we going to do to take care of it? What are we going to do to fix it? So they set off the whole emergency, massive fear, massive concern, whatever it takes. So we shut down the country. The country was shut down. This is now, whatever we're talking, 8 or 10 weeks ago. Shut down the country, shut down non-essential businesses, all sorts. You couldn't even leave your home unless you had a reason to leave your home, justified by the government. And so that was the kickoff point. Those numbers, as we very soon learned, within a few weeks learned, those numbers were grotesquely wrong. They weren't even the ballpark of real. They got adjusted down by orders of magnitude. But the same sense of fear and just this emergency sense of everything must shut down, emergency powers of all the elected officials kick in, everything is going to be kicked into high gear. Based on the original numbers, we never changed our answer. We didn't change our culture. We didn't change our policies, our medical policies, our healthcare policies. We just kept going on bad numbers. And we kept the mindset going on bad numbers. So getting back to what he's saying, it's really important to understand that people who do follow the numbers, who do recognize we were faked out, we were misled, we were duped, need to be spreading that word, making sure their elected officials get that word, because if we continue down the emergency mindset we started back with the bad numbers, and then you get to now, and you have Dershowitz saying, yeah, the government can forcibly vaccinate you, like it or not. And then you have one of these companies working on the vaccination for COVID-19, and many companies are, but somebody comes up with one they claim is safe. We will be facing that question in this country because there are people. Now, I've never done a show on vaccinations. I've never done a show. It's not one of my issues. but I am a person committed to liberty, committed to the idea that we don't just surrender our liberty, our healthcare liberty, to the government. And so the danger to our country, because we never got out of the emergency mode from the original wrong numbers, and now we're looking at Dershowitz saying, yeah, you can forcibly vaccinate. Sure, why not? And not only why not, yes, you can. And then we're going, people are on hyperspeed trying to come up with a vaccination. We need to be alert in our country to the idea this may be something coming out of even liberal, even Republican governors, even conservatives. Well, we got a vaccination and we were all panicked. Let's just force it on everybody. And so I will tell you, the numbers right now, and I have Matt the Wonderful has a chart I'm going to put up for you in just a moment. This is something that was tweeted out by our governor, Governor Abbott here in Texas. But we have the virus lethality rate, the number of people who die as a result of this virus. The lethality rate is 1% or less. It's less in most cases. Or put the other way, the survival rate of people who contract coronavirus, the survival rate is 98 to 99%. So the argument that if there's an emergency, if a vaccine comes up, and now we're all worried about coronavirus, that we ought to be able to jump in and force vaccination, this is a pushback point, a talking point. It is that for 98 to 99% of the people, it's not lethal. We don't have to start the forcible vaccination of adults over a virus that is about as lethal as the flu. The second point is we're in such a race to get a vaccine. And many vaccines, as you well know, if you follow this or you looked at it because of your own health care or your children's or your grandchildren's health care, some vaccines are bad. The swine flu vaccine originally actually hurt a fair number of Americans. It caused them to become not just temporarily ill after they got the vaccine, but to actually be permanently injured. There is a vaccine injury prevention fund paid for by Congress for a reason, because sometimes vaccines aren't good, they aren't safe. And so the idea that you're going to say, well, because we got scared about this vaccine with bad numbers, that because we're so just, jumping up and down trying to get a vaccine to respond to COVID-19, that we're all just going to be forced to we're going to line up and get it. No, some vaccines aren't safe. There's a huge difference. My friends, there's a huge difference between, a new vaccine developed and new vaccine developed, tested, track record, no side effects, doesn't kill half the people to whom it's given. And there's just a rush in this country, an unjustified rush to deal with this challenge of COVID-19, to get us a vaccine as fast as we can. Much of what we're going to talk about today is recognizing we're starting to shape public policy around the availability of this vaccine. In the back of people's minds, when are we going to stop, track, and trace? Well, we're going to have a vaccine before long. We'll talk about that later. But we're counting on a vaccine that is quickly developed, efficacious, no bad side effects. Otherwise, it's just wonderful in every way. And we may not have that ever. But when you're having Alan Dershowitz pontificate way ahead of the availability of a vaccine, that the government has the right to, as he says, grab you, drag you to the doctor's office and stick a needle in your arm, we have to be alert to where this may be headed, especially in blue states, especially in places where the fear has been kept high, even though the infection rate is not as high as we thought it would be, and where the lethality rate is nowhere near we have to be. I'm going to close out the first five by asking Matt the Wonderful to put up, there's a tweet put out by Governor Abbott, our Texas governor, and these are just actual numbers. 4 most populous states by the numbers. So here we have in the great state of Texas, we have 29 plus million people. The mortality rate is about 5 lines down. It's in blue, a little blue highlight. The mortality rate in Texas, 0.0038, well under 1%, well under half of 1%. So meaning the number, I see they wrote mortality rate, Okay, I hate typos. It's mortality rate, but anyway, you know what they mean. Mortality rate. Texas, 0.0038. Even in, the next one, California, 0.0071. And then you look at Florida, which had, they've been opened right up. Texas and Florida have opened up. Florida, 0.0081. And then you look at New York, the largest number of cases of all, 336,000 cases, 27,000 deaths. The lethality rate, 0.1399. We may put this chart up again later, but I really want you to let that sink in and understand what he's saying by those numbers, that we are making policy around I don't wish disease on anyone. I want us to get after China and fix the problem with China. But we are making serious, serious threats to the liberty of individuals in this country based on a disease with that kind of lethality rate. You know, I'm going to do Matt the Wonderful. I'm going to switch the sequence of topics because we might end up. So I got to tell you, many of you, happy listeners, have gotten a hold of me to say, you should have Dr. Yvette Lozano on your show. She has been on Laura Ingraham. She's been on One America News, all over the media, talking about, she's a doctor here in Dallas, Texas. She's a doctor who's been prescribing hydroxychloroquine along with a combination of other things, zinc and something else, for patients with COVID-19. She's found a fabulous recovery rate. Fabulous recovery rate. I mean, she basically hasn't lost a patient dealing with COVID-19, and they recover using hydroxychloroquine. That alone is a counter to the idea that a vaccination should ever be mandated. But we're good friends, actually. Yvette, I mean, we are good friends. We talk all the time, text all the time. She was going to come on the show today. I'm going to guess she's had an emergency come up in her medical practice because she's not available, and she's very reliable normally. So I'm going to go ahead and do a different topic. The other topic I sent you was called tracking and tracing, the need versus the danger. Just talk to you about this, and maybe we'll see if Yvette becomes available. If she doesn't, I'll just quickly tell you what she wanted to talk about today. But on tracking and tracing, so the idea, again, of this virus, the kickoff of our country's reaction to the virus, our kickoff started with bad data. Bad models, bad data. Made bad policies as a result. So one thing that's happened as we're moving to open the country up, we had even the head of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, he is saying, well, U.S. is ready to open up, but he says he does predict thousands more of contact tracers. The basic idea is start to track and trace the American people so that you can figure out who has the virus, who they've been around, who might be contagious. It's a whole notion of an emergency action we have never done with the flu, never done with other viruses, that says we're going to track every single person. So the idea it is coming out of Washington, coming out of the CDC, and the notion that track and trace is one way we can speed up opening up, because if we open up the country, open up businesses, open up freedom, open up stores and everything else in life, we better have a very robust track and trace system in place. This is what CDC says. I think that is profoundly wrong. I think track and trace is another egregious interference with the right of people to live in freedom. But we have this track and trace thing going on in this country, even in the great state of Texas. And we have, Texas normally the leader in liberty, but we have track and trace. We had our governor just spend $300 million to hire some company to put in place tracking and tracing in the public schools all over the state. It's just that's just to put the system in place, not to implement it. People can volunteer, they're being trained, so they're calling people up. Hey, I hear, so you were over at, the grocery store yesterday, and turns out while you were there 2 aisles over, Suzuki was there, and she's been diagnosed and said, we think you're sick. It is interfering with the individual right of a person to live their life freely because the government's tracking everything. Now, I want to hit some really, really vital points about that. A very good friend of mine who is a member of a state legislature where that state is putting in place tracking and tracing. and he's Republican, and he's getting pushback. People are saying, we don't want to be tracked and traced. Why are you doing this? This is not okay. And so he came back with a little explanation that I don't want to identify him because I didn't ask him if I could do this, but I want to identify or tell you what he had to say about why this track and trace is really kind of cool. It's okay. Conservatives should not mind. He says, well, number one, Trump seems to think it's a good idea. He's saying, it is completely voluntary. That's one defense. Well, it's completely voluntary. You don't want to do track and trace, don't do track and trace. Okay, keep that in mind. It's not going to be voluntary if people, I'm going to tell you, if we get pushback, and most people won't do it in this state, they won't keep it voluntary. He's claiming it's voluntary. Is there a risk for invasion of privacy or divulging of personal information? He goes, yeah, his answer from this governor, this Republican governor in his state, well, yeah, but, we don't have that much privacy anyway. Everybody's always spying on your phone. Everyone knows what you do. The country already is, we're all spied on. Not that big a difference, not that big a deal. Will everyone have to download an app? No, you don't have to. You don't want the app, you don't have to. So it's voluntary. You don't have to get the app. Will there be a permanent database or registry for those who test positive? Oh, no, not going to be that. No. Okay. Will the program track citizens' movements and location by satellite? Oh, no. Will there be any government surveillance by those not willingly cooperating with a contact tracing system? Oh, no. Will there be any authority to force individuals to quarantine if they test positive for the virus? No, they're not going to force quarantine. Any chance CPS would be called, Child Protective Services would be called, to take your children out of your home if someone in the home tested positive? No. Okay. And he ends up by saying, look, everyone's getting overwrought. This is not a big deal. Contact tracing is just a way to help the government, help you. It's all about the government helping you and helping the citizens, protecting citizens. Don't worry about it. And so ends with this point. He says, the devil's in the details, perfectly agrees. You could have details ultimately come out in the state he's in that would make it a more egregious invasion of privacy, and also trust but verify. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on things. I want to counter all those points. Much as I love this guy, friend of mine, state rep, another state, I want to tell you that we need to be extremely alert to this idea of tracking and tracing. And I want to address with you some of the arguments I hear from people saying, hey, how could you oppose tracking and tracing? It's just another way to keep us safe. They're just trying to help us. Why are you concerned? One answer you get is, well, if we can save just one life. Isn't it worth it to you? So you lose a little privacy. If you can save just one life, isn't it worth it? And I want you to think about that. Frankly, this argument appeals to women. But let me give you a counter to that. If we in America banned all driving, nobody can drive in cars anymore, we would save 1.25 million Americans every year. That's the average number of Americans killed in car accidents every year, 1.25 million. And so you say, well, this contact tracing, bearing in mind, coronavirus has a 98 to 99% survival rate. So it's under 1%, even in New York, with the worst situation in the whole country. New York's lethality rate, 0.1399, not even 0.14. For the same reason, we're not going to ban driving, even though it could save over 1 million lives. We're not going to submit to tracking and tracing. We're not going to surrender our liberty and surrender our freedom in order to save just one life. Would you agree to the government that they can track where you go, keep track of which restaurants you ate at, who was at that restaurant? You are being tracked and traced. All of my friends honestly kind of struck me as goody two-shoes answers, kind of like, oh no, just because the government's tracking and tracing, they would never keep this data. Does the government ever throw any data away? Seriously? Does any entity throw any information away? The idea that you could trust the government not to create a database is absurd. The idea that right now you say, well, it's voluntary, so you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Well, if not enough people cooperate, if very few are willing to be tracked and traced, they're going to make it not voluntary. It's not going to be voluntary. Once they figure out people don't want to play this track and trace game, people are not going to cooperate. Right now they say you don't have to download an app on your phone. Well, your phone's already going to have what we talked about 2 weeks ago or so on this show, where you already have the phone makers. Google is working so the updates in your phone are going to give them the ability to track you further and part of the coronavirus tracking, tracing, Keep America Safe and Healthy project. So you already have that in there. You're not protected just because you don't download some app. This idea that they're not going to keep surveillance on people who don't willingly cooperate, of course they will. You know, just yesterday, before I came here, there was a guy at our front door at our home, and he had on gloves, and he had a little iPad, and he's blah, blah, blah on the iPad, knocking on our door. And I don't know who he was. We don't open the door if we don't know who it is. You know, we just don't do it. But it looked like someone, and they're starting contact tracing here in Dallas, probably a contact tracer. I wasn't even going to think about answering him if it was. And I also don't even want to be in his list of people who said, no, thank you. I don't really want to be hassled and tracked and traced. But people, this gets to the argument about, do you have the right and liberty to live in liberty, or do you just do what the government tells you? It can save one life. Well, so could banning all driving. Save a lot of lives. But we don't surrender our liberty to do that. We don't do that. Next one is, people say, well, go along with tracking and tracing because it's just for this crisis. It's not forever. It's just for this crisis. People, this is a virus. This is a virus that has mutated 30 times already. And there will be more viruses. There are new viruses all the time. Viruses springing out, just endlessly available, and endlessly turning out new viruses all the time. There will be a new virus. There will be a new problem. And the government will say, well, this virus is, this is really bad. You thought COVID-19 was bad. This is way worse. We're going to have to, kick in that tracking and tracing again. Got to bring it back. Once we agree that this is a normal thing to do because of a health crisis, we're never going to get rid of it. There's never a time. This whole idea that we're doing this just for now, not forever, assumes that there be no other virus. And by the way, none of these tracking and tracing things, at least that I've read, has an exit strategy. None of them say, and don't worry, we're only doing this through the end of 2020. Or we're only doing this through 2030. There's no end game. There's no exit strategy. There's no way out. They're starting something that will never go away. And you have to understand that. If you're okay with that, knock yourself out. I am not. And I do not believe, even if you think right now, like my happy friend who's a state rep, who says, oh, we have a Republican governor. He wouldn't misuse this. Okay, but someday you might have a, Governor Whitmer of Michigan type governor in your state who would happily use this data, who would happily make it more forceful, who would happily extend it, who would happily misuse it because they're leftists and they believe in the control of government over the people. That's what leftists want. And the last one, I will say that I hear people saying why tracking and tracing is just going to be a, not a big deal. They say, well, we can't deal with this coronavirus problem and do nothing. We can't go back to normal. We have to do something. Well, we are doing something. We have hydroxychloroquine, which is working like a charm for people, for doctors willing to use it. We have people working on a vaccine for those who want to go that route. And there may be more than one vaccine developed. They'll be tested. We are doing all sorts of things in this country to protect with the coronavirus. My point is, we do not have to go to a program that forever surrenders our liberty, that surrenders the concept that you live in liberty, and you give that up to say, instead where I live, instead what I do is I just sit in my home and wait to be told whether I can leave, whether I have to quarantine for 2 weeks because somebody who was in the grocery store last week was with me. Folks, I want to remind you something. When I say, people say we got to change this, we got to do something and not go back to normal. Try to remember, back to January of this year, January of 2020, you would get up in the morning, You would go to work, you would go to the grocery store, you would go to your tennis lesson, you would go to your friend's house for book club, you would go outside to the park and go bike riding. You'd go out. You did not spend time thinking, I wonder about the health status of this guy next to me. I wonder if he's got the flu. I wonder if she's had her flu shot. I mean, here we are in this restaurant. We're kind of close. I don't know if they had a flu shot. I don't know about this person. You just live life. You had the unspoken assumption of the risk. Of course, we go outside. That's what we do. We go outside and we go to restaurants and we go to businesses. We just take the chance that maybe someone we will see has some problem that is contagious. We just take that risk. You hear people saying, wonder where I caught this cold. Well, I probably caught it from my friend Susie's daughter, so-and-so. I probably caught it somewhere. People recognize it's part of life. We don't have to surrender our liberty to a tracking and tracing system because we have a new virus coming along. All of this is springing from the astonishingly exaggerated models to start with that got us down the path thinking that we have to do something radical. We do not. And I'll tell you, in Oklahoma, they're starting this. So now they're all celebrating Oklahoma because these tracking and tracing companies getting contracts of big states with governors are then putting in place. Now they go, oh, we'll help you reopen school. So to reopen school, everybody has to get a test. Everybody has to get a coronavirus test. Everybody has to get an antibody test. Everybody has to prove they've had their test. And so you see, we've gone from a society based on freedom to a society regimented and controlled by the government. Folks, tracking and tracing, I don't care if you happen to be one of the people who thinks it's a swell idea or maybe it's needed. It is an imposition on liberty, and the people in this country who still value liberty, who still love freedom, are exactly right to speak up and say, no, I'm not complying. And believe me, despite my goody two-shoes friend who's a state rep who's saying, oh no, everything will be fine, the government will crack down on people. The more we agree tracking and tracing is okay, they will crack down on people who didn't get the virus. They've already been talking about requiring a pandemic passport. You have to have a passport to prove that you do not carry the virus, that you have either had it and you have the antibodies, or you've had a vaccine, or else you can't travel. They're already talking about that. Do not take this lightly as it always in this nice government trying to help. This is government taking away your freedom. Two last points on this topic. One is, amazingly, Dr. Fauci came out recently, and when they were talking about opening up the states, he was worried about opening up too soon. He said the coronavirus has a phenomenal ability to spread like wildfire as lockdowns are lifted. Fauci is committed to keeping America afraid. Fauci is committed to keeping this country locked down as long as they can. His preference, my assumption, he hasn't said these words, he loved the country mostly locked down until a vaccine comes out. That's what he has in mind. So I got to tell you, this contact tracing stuff, very, very, very scary. And by the way, one other thing that came out is very, very interesting. CDC has a change in their policy because they were originally saying, you know, coronavirus, it can live on a surface for days and days. They're now saying, actually, that's not true. Coronavirus spreads pretty much through human contact. They are withdrawing. They're saying it actually does not spread easily on contaminated surfaces. Tracking and tracing is a huge step to loss of liberty in this country. Okay, friends, I got a text from my friend Yvette Lozano while we were talking about the other topic here. She is actually not going to be available today. She's a doctor. We have a very lengthy clip Matt has available, and I don't even think I can, in fairness to her, I don't think I can play it. Let's just start it. We'll have to cut it off because it's too long. But she, my friend Yvette Lozano, a doctor here in Dallas, sole practitioner, always done her own practice. She heard President Trump mention hydroxychloroquine. She began to have COVID-19 patients. All these patients were telling her was, I went to the emergency room and they sent me home. They said, go home, stay in bed, you know, drink lots of liquids, get a lot of sleep. I mean, there was nothing they were offering. except if you were too extremely far down the path of the disease, then they might stick you into into some kind of into the ICU and eventually end up on a respirator, which is a huge problem, another whole problem. But back to what Yvette discovered. So she tells this story. She told it at a rally in Dallas and a Open Texas rally, and now she's told in other media. She's going to come on. I'll have her some other time, but she was going to come on to say this. She started seeing patients who had no other avenue, no way to get relief from the scary and unpleasant symptoms of COVID-19. She heard Trump mention hydroxychloroquine. She did the research herself. She had actually prescribed hydroxychloroquine over the years as a doctor to people with lupus and as a preventive for malaria. It's been an FDA-approved drug for years. So she decided, after researching and finding other doctors in this country who had successfully used it, she began using hydroxychloroquine, prescribing it for her patients. She is finding complete recovery. Whether they are people with mild symptoms, medium symptoms, mild, fairly serious, and very serious extreme symptoms, in all cases, hydroxychloroquine, and I'm be clear, this is not medical advice. You got to go to a doctor. I would suggest Dr. Lozano here in Dallas, but got to go to a doctor. But the point is, this suffering we're seeing around the country with people with COVID-19, she is discovering hydroxychloroquine mixed with zinc and something else. Again, not a doctor here. Complete recovery. And she tells story after story. She has testimonials on her Facebook page. A guy in Texas who drove 360 miles or something to get to Dallas to come to her medical practice to say he was really suffering, and literally started taking those drugs and discovered he was completely recovered, completely healed. And I raised this story to say, I'm not a medical person. I want Yvette to tell the story, Dr. Lozano to tell the story, but I want to say to you, it's a very, very scary, alarming, and wrong, irrational thing that in this country, you still have Dr. Fauci and others in Washington expressing concern about the idea that doctors are prescribing hydroxychloroquine for patients with COVID-19, even though doctors around the country are saying the same thing Yvette Lozano was going to say today, which was, it works. It brings relief to patients with COVID-19. And it really calls into question the integrity of a Dr. Fauci type when he keeps saying things like, well, we haven't had double-blind tests yet. We haven't had this, haven't had that. And at some point, if this is such a big crisis, why wouldn't every entity in Washington, why wouldn't all of the medical experts advising Trump at least have the integrity to say, look, we hear from doctors all over the country. Hydroxychloroquine is working. Why don't they want to say that? Are they so committed to the vaccine outcome that this ruins their whole vaccine plan? If hydroxychloroquine is working, and by the way, I'm closing out on Yvette Lozano. We'll get another time, but I did see, as you saw, I think that President Trump had said that he's taking hydroxychloroquine as a preventative. He's taking hydroxychloroquine and something else, but taking it as a preventative because he knows he has been around people who've had been exposed to coronavirus. So he's taking it, and he's obviously taking it. He's upstanding. He's fine. And I saw Dr. Lozano had put up something on her social media saying, good for him. I had planned on asking her, is it good as a preventative, or is it only good if you've already contracted COVID-19 and then use hydroxychloroquine? I was on a very small and I was the only non-medical person on a very small call about a month ago now with doctors and who involved in dealing with COVID-19. And even on this call, these doctors were split on the question of whether or not hydroxychloroquine was a good thing as a preventative versus should it just be prescribed if you have already contracted coronavirus. It was very interesting because these doctors, some are saying, no, I think it actually is working great. I'm giving it to people as a preventative. Others say, no, it only should be for curative. But here's a great thing about medicine in America, at least in America we're supposed to have. There's actually freedom, healthcare freedom, freedom to turn to your healthcare provider and ask, what do you think? And to seek the opinion of 2, 3, or 4 other healthcare providers. What do you think? There is the ability of people to turn to their doctors, their experts, seek other opinions, and follow the course recommended by their doctor. And that's one thing I know Yvette Lozano has pushed over and over is, you got to get with a doctor you trust and then go with the advice of that doctor. So we'll get to that another day. The last thing I want to close the show today, just talk about Memorial Day. So first of all, Memorial Day, this coming Monday, I will not be doing a show. I'm going to take a day off, as is the entire Real News PR, Real News Communications Network. Take a day off. I hope you get to celebrate Memorial Day. I want to urge you to remember the reason for Memorial Day. I know you know, but is to honor and thank and remember all of the Americans over our whole history who've given their lives in defense of our country. That's the point of Memorial Day, to honor and remember the people who gave their lives, the ultimate sacrifice, lost their lives. And I was going to tell you something kind of parallel to where we are today in this country. And by the way, before I forget, Tuesday, the day after that, we have Katie McFarland joining us. You probably know that name. She has a new book out. She has a lot to say about the Mueller collusion and Susan Rice and all of that. So we'll have a great time on Tuesday. But back to Memorial Day, I want to leave you with some thoughts and some numbers I just had learned. So, everyone knows the big image, and many movies made about it, portraying what happened on D-Day. How American soldiers were literally pouring out the back of these ships, walking through the water and climbing the cliffs and getting shot down and killed, well aware as they left those boats, they had very little likelihood of survival. Well aware that they had to go up the cliffs, they had to go on D-Day to begin the pushback against Nazi Germany. And the heroism, the bravery, the self-sacrifice, I think I read this, I don't have it in front of me, but the average age of the American soldier who died on D-Day was like 19. These are babies. These are kids who should be in college discussing which girl to ask out. Instead, they're over there on D-Day, knowing very well they're going to give their lives. They're obviously not the only American heroes who gave their, who gave their lives in the service of America. We have heroes from the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, all the wars we fought. We have heroes who stood up and defended American freedom. At the time of D-Day, we didn't even know that about the Holocaust. We did not know what was happening in Germany. At least the average Joe did not know. But those people getting out of those boats, those American soldiers climbing the cliffs, getting shot down, death all around them, they knew they had to stop the evil of the Nazi tyranny. They had to stop the quest of Hitler to take over the world. That's what they knew. They knew you have to fight tyranny. Sometimes it takes the ultimate sacrifice, and they were willing to make it. And what they were fighting was actual tyranny by the Nazis, who thought they had the right, and they were doing the right thing in working to take over the world. So honoring those people, it includes remembering all those who gave their lives, but also involves remembering that it takes bravery to fight tyranny. You can't curl up in your home and really grumble about how bad Hitler is. And that's not fighting. You have to be in the fight to take out tyranny, to stand up for good. In America today, I would never begin to equate what those young men went through and all of the soldiers in American history went through as they gave their lives in the sacrifice for their country, to preserve their country. America is in a different battle, though, right now. It's not a battle with Nazis. It's not a battle with the Germans. It's not a battle with any other country. But the internal battle happening in this country is truly a battle. You can call it a battle of ideas, but it is a battle for preserving the great and unique, extraordinary identity of a country rooted in freedom, of a country based from its very founding, from the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, a country rooted in freedom, in the right of the individual to live in freedom, the right of the individual to live their life, to pursue their version of life, liberty, and their version of happiness without undue government control. The battle today in America, it is a battle of ideas, but it is lethal if the leftists in this country, the mission they have to destroy the foundational idea of America, to bring Marxism, to bring socialism to this country, is every bit as destructive of the idea of America as the past wars were in destroying America. It matters to see the battle of preserving America today in that context. We're not just trying to win an election with someone with an R by their name versus someone with an L by their name and who won this time. On the left in this country, you can see it in the conduct of Judge Emmett Sullivan, the deep state radical left. He does not care any longer what the rule of law requires him to do as a federal district court judge. He's saying, I'm going to take out Michael Flynn and I don't care what I am required to do as a judge. I am going to do that. You see leftism in this country in the form of the Green New Deal, the radical, complete crushing of freedom in this country. The left is very much on the march in this country to take away your healthcare freedom, to steal the fall elections through the Election Fraud Enablement Act they are pushing in Washington. They are building their army of people who will fight to the death for the radical leftist takeover of this country. And if that happens, if we do not reelect President Trump, if we do not reelect, and we need a Republican majority in the House, reelect a bigger majority in the Senate for the Republicans, we are going to face tyranny from the left. What you're seeing the left do in this country today is the absolute radical, tyrannical removal, destruction, uprooting of everything that America was founded on. The left in this country, what Bernie Sanders stands for, what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stands for, what the now millions of members of the Democrat Socialists of America, what the millennials who poll sometimes in the majority supporting socialism, those ideas, socialism, Marxism, communism, collectivism, they're all one big ugly attack on the freedom upon which America was founded. And you can fight that battle. Everyone has a job to fight that battle, to fight in that battle, to say, I am not going to surrender to the left, even if they make fun of me, even if they call me names. I mean, look what Trump has had to put up with just for trying to defend his America First agenda. Look what happens to anyone who speaks up to defend him, to defend the idea of America, the idea of individual freedom, the idea of religious freedom, the idea of a sovereign nation with a border. The left is on the march in this country to destroy the very foundational idea of America. It matters to get that. It matters to understand that, to comprehend that, to put the battle that's before us in November 2020 in that large of a context. It's America the free or America the collectivist. And if the collectivist, Marxist, communist, socialist left in this country ever gets control of the White House, the House, and the Senate, you will not recognize this precious country anymore. Well, folks, that's the show for today. I'm going to very quickly turn, as I always do at the end of the show, to tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started with today's show. We started with Alan Dershowitz, Government Can Forcibly Vaccinate. Dershowitz is a respected constitutional lawyer, generally fair-minded liberal, but there are massive and questionable assumptions underlying his pronouncement. Remember, forced injections, that's what they did at Auschwitz. Who determines what disease is sufficiently dangerous and contagious? What metrics define this? COVID lethality rates are smaller than a bad flu. America has never forced vaccinations for the flu. Who determines what vaccine is sufficiently safe and efficacious? What metrics define this? What percent side effects? What percent of failures? When does the quality of the vaccine enter into this supposed right to force it on us? Americans are witnessing monumental failures of COVID experts every day. Are Americans really willing to let experts dictate forcible vaccinations? On tracking and tracing, need versus danger, the CDC is pushing back. Okay, we're on the next one. The CDC is pushing. There we go. The CDC is pushing track and trace programs as critical to reopening. This is the camel's nose of tyranny inside the tent of liberty. Don't buy the bogus arguments. It's strictly voluntary? Sure. Unless not enough people volunteer, then what? Incentives to comply, social credit systems, separating the good citizens from the bad citizens. It's worth it if it saves one life. Get real. Banning driving will save 1.25 million lives a year, but will end the freedom to move around as we please. We wouldn't think of banning driving. Tracking and tracing, T&T, is the beginning of the end of individual sovereignty. The answer is no and hell no. We have to do something. No, we don't have to do something. Look at the data. We're not stuck on stupid. COVID does not warrant extreme measures. Technology that says we can do T&T, tracking and tracing, does not mean that we should do it. And on Memorial Day, always remember and reponder those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Why did they do it? What were they fighting to preserve and protect? Americans in 2020 do not have to storm the beaches of Normandy. They do not have to die for the sake of preserving freedom. But in 2020, Americans do have to rise up and take a stand. We do have to challenge and perhaps engage in civil disobedience against the COVID tyrants. We do have to insist on reopening our country and living life. Americans must refuse to surrender individual freedom to experts. And that, my friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. I'll be back Tuesday next week with KT McFarland joining us. And I thank you for tuning in to America Can We Talk every day, Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you hear